What's so important about love? I'm going to give you 3 reasons why love is extremely important, and our understanding of it and our exercise of it is so crucial in our lives as believers. So I want to talk about Matthew 22, verses 37 through 38. If you want to turn there, you can, but if you don't, that's okay. The text is read because these are the words of Jesus. So verse 37, Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." He says, this is the first and great commandment, to love the Lord your God. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, the law and the prophets here, in the words of Jesus, refers to the Old Testament. You can pretty neatly divide it between the Torah, the law, and all of the works of the prophets that came afterwards. So, essentially what Jesus is saying, because all they had was the Old Testament in his day, because the disciples hadn't written the New Testament yet, he's saying that the whole Bible can be summed up in these 2 commandments about love. Loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving each other like we love ourselves, or as we love ourselves. So, that's our first reason. Jesus says, love, this commandment to love, it's pretty much sums up everything that life is about. So, that's one reason to study it. A second reason, also from Jesus, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus explains that people's actions and their choices are evidence of the condition of their hearts. And in Matthew 7, he warns us to beware of false prophets and false teachers. People who would try to sell you a bill of goods, try to manipulate you for their own personal gain. And that people would do that from the pulpit. People would do that from a religious perspective. And he warns us about these people, and he tells us how to discern whether or not they're for real or not. He says in verse 16 of Matthew chapter 7, "You will know them by their fruits." Now, since most of you have grown up in church, you're all probably familiar with the fruit of the Spirit. Anybody tell me any of them? Anybody know what the first fruit of the Spirit is?
Love.
Love, exactly. You got it. So, we see Jesus referring to the actions that we see, the way that we live our lives, the choices that we make as fruit. And Paul the Apostle continues that same object lesson in Galatians chapter 5, which lists the fruits of the Spirit. And he does that because good fruit or bad fruit is a natural byproduct of a healthy or an unhealthy tree. So then our works, our fruits, our spiritual fruits, they don't save us. We can't work our way into heaven because it's a free gift to all who believe because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. But even though our fruit, our works don't save us, they are strong indicators of whether or not we actually are saved. And that is something that we need to pay close attention to. The third and final reason I'm going to share with you why love is important is that it's actually the reason is in the same chapter that we're going to be studying today. So if you look in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, I believe it's in verse 13, it describes 3 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is God's personal presence in our hearts. When you are saved, God will literally indwell you at the core of your being. He becomes a part of who you are. And we see that there are spiritual gifts that come from God. These are not things that we can drum up or things that we can do on our own. These are gifts that are born of our relationship with God. And Paul lists 3 of them that we will carry into eternity. And he does that in contrast with some of the other spiritual gifts like prophecy, tongues, and all that kind of stuff. He's saying those gifts will fade away. Gifts of prophecy, gifts of tongues. He says, but these 3, faith, hope, and love, are gifts of the Spirit that we will carry with us into eternity, into glory, and the new heaven and the new earth ahead of us with Jesus. And of those 3, faith, hope, and love, he tells us that the greatest of the 3 is love. And that is because faith and hope are not possible without love. And the love that we're talking about here, the love that we've been talking about all along, is agape love. That is the divine, unconditional love of God. In contrast Worldly love is given when you have something to gain from somebody else. There's almost a transaction involved. Whereas true love from God, agape love, is always given freely with no strings attached. And this kind of love, agape love, is something that we need to be demonstrating in the way that we live if we are saved sons and daughters of God. This is why in this series on love, Austin and Darian have been explaining both the nature and the importance of love. They've explained, and we'll continue to explain, what love is and what it is not. And we're not going to do that because we're super smart and we've got a lock on what love is. We're going to do that using 1 Corinthians chapter 13 as our guide. That's why you see these examples. It says love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, boastful, etc. So last time, Austin talked about the contrast between pride and humility and how they relate to love. Using that verse where it says, it's actually the second part of verse 4, where it says, love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Pride always has its focus on me, on self. While humility, see, we get this false idea about humility. This is why you hear that term. I think it's just falsely humble is the term that you hear, or falsely modest or whatever. That's where somebody would tell you like, oh, great job on worship today, Darian. Now, or great job on worship today, Rollin. And then I respond and I go, oh, it really wasn't anything. It's nothing special. And inside I'm saying, it was pretty good actually. But I gotta appear modest. That's not modesty, that's not humility. If I say that, if I do that, I'm not being humble. Humility is actually not thinking of yourself at all. It's not thinking you're super awesome, and it's not thinking, oh, I'm the worst, I wish I was better. So this is important because it ties into what we're going to get into today and how love is not selfish. Love does not demand its own way. Love is not irritable. So we need to talk about what it means to demand our own way. We need to understand what selfishness is if we're going to stop being selfish. So what is selfishness? I think the best way to understand what selfishness is to go back to where it started, to go back to the beginning. In the first 3 chapters of Genesis, we get to see a before and after picture of sin. We see what perfect love looks like before the fall of man, and we see what selfishness and sin looks like afterwards. Chapter 3 speaks of Adam and Eve walking with God in the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden. This means that they had perfect fellowship with God. Now, if you look at tons of other examples in the Bible of people encountering God, it's always in a limited fashion, and there's always this divide. People are afraid. People feel small. They feel like something is wrong, like their death is imminent. You'll actually see that a lot in the Old Testament. They'll freak out, and then after the presence of God leaves, they go, I'm not dead. Like, whoa. Am I still alive here? Now, the reason for that is you see what sin does to Adam and Eve's relationship with God. And the first thing that you notice them doing after they sin is they're afraid of God. So we see this perfect fellowship and unity that they enjoyed with God being broken by sin. But we also see Adam and Eve enjoying perfect fellowship and unity together as a husband and wife as well. And you see that in chapter 2 of Genesis. But when Eve is deceived by Satan in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, it says, quote, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, she saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom that it would give her. That's what the serpent told her. He said, in the day you eat of that tree, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So then what Eve starts to do is she starts to think about that. She starts to think about what she wanted. It says she wanted the wisdom it would give her, so she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. That is the first selfish thought that Eve had ever had. And after she willfully sins here, she ropes Adam into it as well. Because the thing about sin is it's just like misery. It always loves company. You can't, it's not enough for us to just be in sin. It always ends up dragging other people into it as well. So Eve, in acting in sinfulness and selfishness, she goes, hey, Adam, you too. You eat it too. I just ate it. Now you got to eat it. So, and he does. He makes a choice to sin as well. So what happens afterwards is God notices Adam and Eve behaving strangely. So God, he's used to walking in the garden with them. It seems like, looking at Genesis chapter 3, that this was a regular thing that they enjoyed, that there was this time of the day when they would hang out with God. There was a time of day when they'd do the lovey-dovey couple stuff, and then they'd hang out with him in the cool of the day. So God shows up, and he looks around, and he doesn't see him anywhere. Not exactly. He does know where they are, but they're hiding themselves from him. And he's saying, Adam, where are you? And then when Adam figures out, well, I can't hide from God, duh. He goes, well, I hid myself because I was afraid. And God said, why are you afraid of me? And he said, well, I knew I was naked. And God said, who told you you were naked? God starts asking them these questions. He asks them, he actually says, who told you you were naked? And then he follows it up. And he says, did you eat from that tree that I told you not to eat from? And then as they begin to confess what happened, you got to pay attention, close attention to the way that they respond. Because they both respond selfishly. It's every man, every woman for herself at this point. This couple, these two human beings who had perfect fellowship, perfect love and unity, now they don't have that. That's all broken, and they're focused only on themselves. Adam blames Eve, and he blames God for the sinful choice that he made. He says, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree. It was not a treat, and I ate. So he's saying, God, you gave me the woman, so this is kind of your fault. And he's like, Eve, you gave me the fruit, so this is definitely kind of your fault. And then God says, well, Eve, what's up? What happened here? And Eve, she also blames somebody else. She blames the serpent, which is also kind of implying, God, that serpent you made over there? Well, he deceived me, and then I ate. So this is the first example of sin in the Bible. This is the first sin in creation. And we see its effects in Eden. We see that sin is actually inherently selfish. The love and the unity that we saw in the relationship between God and Adam and Eve, and the relationship that they had between each other, between themselves, it was all shattered by sin. And any loyalty that they once had to God and loyalty that they had to each other was transformed into loyalty towards themselves, and only themselves. And today, we are under this same curse of sin. And what that does is sin, and the sin nature that we all have, that we experience as we're born into this world, is that sin turns the love that we should have towards God and towards each other, it turns it towards ourselves. And this is why it's completely natural for you and for me to consider ourselves the center of the universe. Don't we all do that? We don't really have to try very hard to do that. Because of that, we want to live and we want to act in a completely opposite fashion to Paul's description of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which tells us love does not insist on its own way. But we do, don't we? You don't have to teach a toddler to act out or to throw tantrums or to say, no! You have to teach a child to obey. You have to teach a child to be good, not to be bad. This fallen nature that was acquired by Adam and Eve, it has been passed to all of their children, to include you and me. And because of it, even after we are saved, we still have a traitor living inside all of us. You see that referred to in the Bible often as the flesh. The flesh warring against the spirit. The spirit is that new life that you have inside of you, that new heart, that new nature that Jesus gives us. But the problem is that new heart and new nature is still inside of this. We're still human. We're still fallen. So this traitor inside of us, really, I look at these we always say the devil made me do it, or it was peer pressure or whatever. They have influences on us, certainly, but I got to tell you, my own worst enemy, even though Satan's a really bad guy, me. Mm-hmm. I am my own worst enemy. And you are yours. this worst enemy of ourselves, we're going to be in a battle with him or with her our entire lives, no matter what stage of life we are at, whether we are a toddler, whether we are kids, whether we are teens, whether we are college age, or whether we are adults. So the questions that remain then are, how does this apply to you as teens? Because this is a youth group. What are ways that selfishness can manifest and infiltrate your lives? And then how do we beat it? How do we beat our own worst enemy ourselves? So now I'm actually going to turn it over to Julie because, like I said, you get a combo deal today. So I covered half. She's going to cover the second half.
Yeah, so if you guys want to turn to Luke chapter 9, verses 23 through 24. I'm going to continue on with what Rollin was talking about, but if you walk away from here with nothing else, walk away with those verses. Those are the ones, we're going to go through them and we're going to dissect them too. So, like Rollin was saying with those questions, how does selfish living apply to us and how does it infiltrate, right? And those questions made me think of actually what Rollin was talking about with the toddlers, how you don't have to teach them to be selfish. And it made me think about our different stages in life, how when you have a baby, right, baby doesn't care if it's 2 a.m., you're sleeping, doesn't matter, right? It is going to cry when it's hungry, and you are going to get your butt up out of bed, and you're going to feed that baby, right? So naturally, very selfish, and we just all expect that. We know that of babies. And then toddlers, they start to get to an age where they start to be a little bit more teachable. You can say, no, don't hit, share the toy. And if you've ever tried to teach a toddler through that, it doesn't go over very well. It's like, but this is my toy. What do you mean I have to share it, So they're at that age, they're starting to be like, there's more people in this world except for me, and I have to do things I don't like. Like, what is this,
The birthday party where it's like, all the kids are all trying to
open up their Oh my gosh, have you been to a toddler birthday party? It's like they're surrounded by presents and the toddler's like, yes, or the kid is like, yes. And then little kids even younger than they will come over and start like opening their gift and it's like, no. Yeah. Oh man, it's the best. So you have that stage, right, so it's natural. It's natural to just be selfish and think that the world belongs to them. I remember Evie, my little sister, when she was just a kid at we were going skiing and she was at Hunt Hollow and she walked over, we just missed her doing this, but she walked over to this table and she just grabs this cookie off the table, somebody else's cookie, and just goes and my dad's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and the lady was like, oh, she goes, at that age the world is theirs, and it's true, it's like the perspective, and then we enter into our tween years, where it's like we actually start to learn for ourselves this truth, where it's like, okay, if I'm actually gonna want to have friends, right? I'm gonna have to think about more than just myself. Like I'm gonna have to think about her birthday if I'm gonna, be her friend, and I'm gonna think about other people. And it's like I can't be selfish and keep all my stuff to myself and just be, because otherwise I won't have any friends, right? So we start to kind of learn that ourselves. And then when we enter our teen years and the stages that you guys are at, it's like, okay, you guys are in transition. You're in your first steps into independence. You're finding out who you are, or as the world says, finding your place in this world, right? And in this transition, you're standing on ground that your parents taught you, truths that your parents told you, you do this because of this. But now that you're transitioning and you're going to be on your own, it's like, okay, well, why do I believe that? Is it just because my parents said so? Or am I, you're starting to stand on your own feet and try to ask yourselves, like, why do I believe in what I believe, And it's especially during this time in our lives where we can lose sight of Christ because we're focusing on ourselves naturally. We're, where am I going to be in a few years? Is it college? Is it into the workforce even more than I'm already at? Or is it a different place in the workforce? Or there's different things like prom or TikTok or whatever. There's things that are on your mind, and a lot of it because of our culture too. So we have both our sinful nature and then also the culture saying it's all about you. Like, believe in yourself, So you've got double whammy going on. And I know for me, a big one was really wanting a relationship. I was in this mindset of no, I need a relationship. And the desire to have that, to not be alone, is natural for a lot of us. It's God-given for a lot of us. And, he said that it's not good for man to be alone. So the desire in and of itself is good, but the danger is that we can turn it into an idol. We can make it about us and we can make it more than it really is. And in doing so, by turning your eyes inward, you then therefore take your eyes off of Jesus. Being selfish and putting your eyes on yourselves, or actually really keeping your eyes on yourself is a better way to say it, because that's our natural default. When we do that, it affects the view of the world, right? This verse says love is not irritable, but selfishness is irritable, and you'll never be happy living selfishly, trying to fill the void. You'll be cranky as you look at others who are in relationships, and you'll be like, they suck, or people having what you don't have, having a lot of money, or having the job that you wanted. Somebody gets the promotion, and that you worked harder and you deserve it. It's just gonna fester within you, and it's gonna affect your outlook. And you're going to lash out, and the reason you're going to lash out in whatever way you lash out is because you have bad fruit. That is the bad fruit, and it's stemming from rottenness in your heart. So happiness will always be just out of reach for you. And you'll view others as obstacles to the happiness, too. And, with this relationship, it's like now, after all the stuff that I've been through, I have the perfect man in that he's perfect for me. He's not perfect himself.
I'm not perfect.
He'd be the first to admit he is not perfect, but he's perfect for me. And the reason I'm saying this is to say I'm the most blessed girl on this planet, but even having this awesome relationship, that in and of itself is not enough. I can tell you through experience, I'm not going to be satisfied. He's not going to be satisfied in only me, no matter how perfect the marriage is, no matter how perfect the relationship is. Because we have a God-shaped hole in our heart, and no thing or relationship or person is going to fill that void. God is the only one who can. So, R.C. Sproul had this quote that I liked. So talking about true love is characterized by generosity. So the opposite of taking in, it's like giving out, which seeks to give and not to take in for oneself, making it the very opposite of selfishness. Love means that we are willing to give our lives for the sake of others. This is how God loved us. And see, that's the key. It's how does God love us? Well, he loved us by offering up his only begotten Son to die a shameful death under his wrath. That's the biggest part right there. Took on God's wrath. It's like you have the physical punishment of the cross, but he took on so much more eternally that you can't see for all the sin of the world. So he did that in order to save us. So, moving on to the third question that Rollin had is, how do we beat our own worst enemy? How do we beat ourselves? And that's where we're going to go to Luke 9:23 through 24. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the verses, and then we're going to dissect it, because the reason I brought you here is because this is the answer. If you have been following along with us and you're like, okay, Julie, Rollin, I get it, I'm selfish, but now what, right? So verse 23 through 24 says, "Then Jesus said to the crowd, 'If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it.'" So there's a lot packed in these two verses. So I'm going to walk through it with you, okay? So the first part, if any of you wants to be my follower. That's a really good point to pause. If any of you wants to be my follower. Be my follower, be a Christian. That's what being a Christian is, right? We're following Christ. Do you want that? I think it's a good question for us to stop and think about. Do you want to be a Christian? Why are you here? Why are you here at church? Are you here because your parents drove you here? Yeah, okay, but one day they're not going to be there to drive you to church. One day you're going to be out on your own, and you're going to have to make a choice yourself. Am I going to get up and go to church? Am I going to choose friends to surround myself with who are going to challenge me? Do you want to be in a relationship with Jesus? Do you want that to grow? Do you recognize your need for him? Do you understand the price he paid for you on that cross? You know, alluded to it before earlier, is that he died physically on that cross, but he took the wrath of God for your place, in your place. So the second part, if you want to be my follower, Jesus says, if you understand your need for him, if you want to follow me, then you must give up your own way. Notice how he says must. This is a commandment. This isn't, oh, if you feel like it today, right? Give up your own way, give up your selfishness. No, you must. You must give up your own way. And look what it says, too. You must give up your own way. Take up your cross daily. Every single day. It's saying, take up your cross. That means you have to die. You have to put your selfish ways to death. Take up your electric chair daily, right? The cross back then was a horrible way to die, the worst way to die, right? Colossians 3:5 says, so, along the same lines, put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Romans 8:12-13 says, therefore, dear brothers and sisters, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. Remember that, because that's exactly the opposite of what the world is telling you to do. It's not really your fault. Like, I was in with a doctor and a patient who was in there because of addiction. You know, she took an entire bottle of an antidepressant to try to get high. And she was there, she was remorseful, she wanted to change for the sake of her kids. And the doctor said, well, it's not your fault, don't blame yourself. It's addiction is a disease, and we have to treat the disease as such. Okay, but it's because we've removed God from the nation, so we don't know what sin is, and we don't understand it, and so the medical community is having trouble, and so they're taking addiction and they're labeling it as, well, it's just a disease, like any other disease, like heart disease. We just have to treat it. But they took out the only answer for our treatment for sin, you know? And so Romans 8:12-13 is saying, you don't have to do this. You don't have to live selfishly. You don't have to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. Right? That goes back to Adam and Eve. God says, you eat of this fruit, you choose sinful way, you are going to die. But, this is the good news, but if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. And I love that. Through the power of the Spirit. You don't have to do this on your own. You don't have to come up with the strength and the choice and the willpower to just not do the sinful things anymore. It's not up to you, and that's such a relief, right? It's through the power of the Spirit. You put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, and you will live. And so it says, take up your cross daily. Every single day, this is something that you're going to have to deal with. So, unfortunately, it's not like a one-and-done thing. Like, okay, my Christian walk, selfishness, check. Like, no longer selfish anymore, gave it over to God, I'm good. It's like, no, sorry, every day. Because, again, our default is just, we wake up and whose eyes are we looking through at this world? We're looking through our own, Mm-hmm. So, every day, this is a battle that you're just going to have to just keep fighting through. But the best part, too, is at the end of that Romans where it says, through the power of the Spirit, you will put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. That's the part I want to focus on, too, because life, that is what Jesus has come for us to live, to live. And he says, so give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. And follow me, that part right there. Do you see how it's give up, take up, and follow? Those are the action words in the verse. Give up living for yourself. Through the power of the Spirit, like we talked about, put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, or another way to say it is, turn from your sinful ways, right? Through God's power, through the power of this Holy Spirit. And then, this is the best part, just follow. That's it. Just follow. And it's such a relief, and there's peace in that. Just follow. Because you don't have to squeeze out the fruit, like yourself. Like you don't sit there and say, okay, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be more patient today. It's like you don't have to. It's you just, in John 15 talks about connecting to the vine, right? You just connect to the Lord and you just follow. And this made me think of like being in the jungle. When I was down in Brazil, there was like the jungle was like really thick, and there was like these people, they would carry around these huge machetes, like rusty, nasty, and they'd sit there and just hack. But it was actually very easy to just kind of walk through a path that somebody already hacked down. And that's what Jesus did for us on that cross. He hacked this path, and now he's just like, okay, just give it up, give up your selfish ways. You don't have to live that way. Just follow me, follow this path that I'm making for you. So, with that, he ends by saying in verse 24, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. He's saying if you're just like, no, I want my way, I want this job, I want these friends, I want this life, I'm gonna hold on to it, hang on to it, use all my energy to just build on myself, build up my money, build up my kingdom. He's saying, if you do that, you'll lose it. You're gonna wake up one day, you're gonna be in your 80s, and you're gonna look back and say, what did I just do all this for? I have all the money, I have everything I want, and it's all just gonna burn, But instead, he's saying, give up your life for my sake, and you will save it. See, Jesus is not asking us to put to death our selfishness and then to just stay dead. He's asking us to put to death our selfishness daily, follow him, just give up, follow him, so that we'll live. Because he cares about us and he loves us and he's died so that we can have life. And we can have life starting now. We don't have to wait till heaven. And it's such a great thing to be free from the chains of selfish living too, because it will just drag you down. And it's not a way to live. But the world doesn't know another way because it rejects God, so it tells you, oh, it's just about you, do what pleases you. So, God, he doesn't insist on his own way. That's what this part in this verse in Corinthians says, love does not demand its own way. God doesn't either. He doesn't force his own way on us. He won't force a relationship with us. We need to choose and invest our time in relationship with the Lord. We have to choose daily to actually spend time with him and to connect to him. We have to build good habits now. This is such a crucial time in your guys' life, because the reason why it's so important to give time over to the Lord now is because you're only going to have less and less time. It's like as you get older and responsibilities come on and on and on, you're just going to have even less time than you have now. Trying to balance college load, classes, homework, all that stuff, or just jobs and responsibilities. Having a house, oh my God. Lots of responsibilities. The other reason why it's important to develop good habits now is that your relationship with God will affect all of your other relationships. And every relationship for the rest of your life. We see unhappy marriages all around us. We see divorce all around us, right? And the result, divorce is just the result of selfishness. It's just the inward working, and the I'm going to marry you, the worldly love that Austin was talking about last time. It's like, I'm going to marry you because you're convenient, you give me what I want right now. And 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, well, you're not giving me what I want anymore. So that's just not how God designed it to be. So how do we invest in our relationship with God? Well, one question I wanted to ask you guys is, what do you do when your alarm goes off? I know for me, it's like, that's one of the hardest things. It's like my alarm goes off, throw on my clothes, and it's like I stumble out throughout the door. It's like I remember, in high school, it was like, okay, all of a sudden, second period, third period, lunch, and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, have I prayed once? It's like you can just kind of go through the motions, and it's hard. It's hard to remember that. So one challenge I want to take with you or give with you guys is that do something little in the morning first thing. When your alarm goes off, take 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, anything. Just the first thing you do when your feet hit the floor is just pray. sometimes leaving a physical reminder by your bedside table, that may help. I know for me, at Flower City Work Camp, somebody gave me a square nail because we were working on a really old house, and it was actually a flattened nail. And I remember the campsite leader, he handed it to me, and he said, "Hey, did you know that Jesus was hung on the cross with square nails?" And I didn't know that. I was like, oh, I don't know, I just thought all nails were round. And it's like, yeah, but back then they couldn't make them round because of the machinery, so they flattened it out. And so he handed it to me, and I've kept that nail ever since. And for me, it's on my bedside table, and when I wake up, and sometimes having that physical reminder, just like I just hold it just for a second, again, just 2 seconds, and just say, it's like, thank you for dying on that cross for me, you know? And then gotta get up and change and on with your life, you know, but do what works for you. If it's journaling, if it's whatever, just implement something into your morning so that you remember to pray when you first get up. So if you do this, if you invest in prayer, in reading his word, and spending more time with God, and you surround yourself with friends who challenge you, all of these things will help you become less selfish. Rollin talked about God having the Holy Spirit within you. He will change your heart. It's from the inside out. He'll give you a burning fire, for him. And if you're like, yeah, I haven't felt that fire in a while, or I don't even know what you're talking about, Julie, don't be afraid to ask God for a fire or for a rekindling within you. Pray to him and say, Lord, I don't want to read my Bible. I don't want to do all these things that Julie's talking about right now. I don't want to put down my phone. I've got all these distractions. Give me a desire. God hears that. Even if it's just, if you feel like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, you feel far away from God, he still hears. He's still right there with you, and he hears when you say, just give me the desire and the want to be in a relationship with you, Lord. Again, just revive in me that fire. So, in conclusion, to sum up what we've been talking about, so Jesus commands us to love God with all we got, and to love others, right? That's what Rollin talked about at first. He said, love God with everything, and then love those around us. And remember this, he said you must. This is the command. Because of our sinful nature, because of Adam and Eve and everything that went down, Jesus also commands us to daily die to ourselves. So, question you want to ask yourself is, how does all this sound to you? Do you have a problem with these truths? Are these kind of rubbing you the wrong way? Do you even want to follow him? And they're good questions to ask. Take time, pray over these things. Think about God's character. Think about his great love over you, the price that he paid for you on the cross. And make sure you know, deep within, with everything you've got. Even if you don't know, if you can't sit there and prove why creation over evolution, or you don't know all the truths of the Bible, the difference between an apostle and epistle, or whatever, even though if you don't know all of these things up here, make sure you know and hear why you believe what you believe. Because I guarantee you, when you go out, if you haven't already, you're going to be challenged. There's going to be people who say, you're a Christian, you're one of those, you hate people who don't agree with what you believe, why? So take this time and just know, instead of the answer be, I don't know, my mom and dad they brought me to church, and they told me these things. It's why do you believe it? And just make sure you know before you're tested. And don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged about fighting this daily struggle with yourself, because you don't fight alone. We're all in this together, and Jesus is with us. And gradually he's going to make us more like him. And he will be the one to finish what he started in us. That's one of my favorite verses is he's going to bring it to completion. He's going to do it. So don't worry. It's not on your shoulders. We just have to follow him as he's hacking stuff down in the jungle. So.
Good word.
All right. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time in your word, Lord. It's such a refreshing thing for me, Lord, to just be reminded that it's not on my shoulders, that I don't have to produce good things, I don't have to do this on my own strength, but I can just give it up and just every day not be bound by the chains of the selfishness around me, from within me, my desires, and then also from the culture telling me to live live for myself. I don't have to listen to those. I don't have to be bound. And I just know that that's a dead-end trail. So Lord, instead, just give me the fire to seek after you, to rest in you, to follow the path that you make, and just rely on you. And thank you, Lord, for what you've done, that you've already won this battle, and that you promise to bring us to completion, till the day that you return or until you call us home. Thank you for carrying us the whole way. And we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.